Hello and welcome to the MovieKing Podcast. My name is David Jurmann and I'll be your host. On today's episode, I'm going to review the film A Complete Unknown, and in the second half, I'm going to review Emilia Pérez. Starting off with A Complete Unknown, this is another film I was really looking forward to, and for a few reasons. One is that James Mangold was directing it. I'm a huge fan of his. He did films like Ford v Ferrari, Walk the Line, The Wolverine, Logan, and most recently, Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. While I wasn't a big fan of his work on Indiana Jones, I've enjoyed all his other movies that I've seen, and I think he's an incredibly talented filmmaker. He always knows how to get great performances, make a great looking movie, and he writes really good dialogue too. So it all comes together in this way that just really feels complete and a complete unknown, and he just really knocks it out of the park a lot of the time. And another reason I was excited is because of Timothée Chalamet. He's a very talented actor, and I was looking forward to seeing his take on Bob Dylan, a singer who I'm not that familiar with, though I do know a few of his songs. And I think both James Mangold and Timothée Chalamet delivered here. James Mangold does what he does best, and that's completely transport the audience to a different time and place. I never once felt like I was watching a movie, the way everything comes together, whether it be the production design, costume design, hair and makeup, the way people talk, the color grade, all of it brings you into the 60s. You don't really think you're watching a movie while you see it. Like, you could just totally believe, this is some part of the 60s that they just went back and captured, and obviously that's not like what it is, but it's like, that's how it feels watching it. And that's what James Mangold just does so excellently. With all his movies, he just transports you to a different time and place. I also really like Mangold's dialogue and the interactions he creates. There's good tension and a nice balance of comedy and drama throughout. Mangold also gets really great performances from everyone. I can't think of anyone who was bad or lacking, honestly. Like, the whole cast, the whole ensemble did a really good job. Timothée Chalamet in particular just knocks it out of the park. He's been having a great year between this and Dune Part 2. I think he's honestly even better in the latter, but make no mistake, he's exceptional here. I love what he does with his voice, his mannerisms. He does all the singing and guitar playing. He's great. And again, I don't really even know, Bob Dylan as an artist. Like, I'm not that familiar with him outside of this movie, but what I could tell is that Timothy spent a lot of time outside of it really getting into the role the same way like Austin Butler did with Elvis, and he just completely embodies who Bob Dylan is, from what I understand of him anyway, but he just does a really good job. I think he definitely deserves an Academy Award nomination if he gets one. If not, he deserves one for Dune. I also thought Edward Norton and Elle Fanning were standouts here. They were really good and brought something to their scenes. I like them a lot here. I really like Edward Norton in particular. Also really just had a lot of great scenes with Timothy where the two would interact a lot and have great chemistry. And then Elle Fanning also kind of playing his love interest for a portion of the film. You really got to see a different side to his character through her. And I thought just everyone did a really good job. To me, this movie is at its best when exploring the relationships in Bob Dylan's life. When you see the way he treats his friends, his lovers, and his managers, it tells a story about who Bob Dylan is. And that's where the movie shines the most, because you could see a troubled person who doesn't want to be what everyone wants him to be, and that's pretty interesting. Like, on paper, I think that's a really interesting idea, and there are scenes that convey that very well. I also really like the musical numbers. Hearing Timothée Chalamet sing and seeing the crowds react to him and being put into the moment adds a lot in the film. I mean, I just think every scene with a song in it was really immersive and just got me, like, totally in the right mood. Like, you could tell people were really into it. Like, this girl sitting next to me, this older woman, was, like, snapping her fingers a little bit, and she was, like, moving around. And you could just really tell she enjoyed what she was watching. Interestingly, though, my main issue with the movie is the way it handles Bob Dylan. Not that it's bad, it's not. I mean, I think the movie does a fine job there, but I think describing it would make it sound more harsh than intended. But what this movie does is it purposefully has no character arc for Bob Dylan. Like, in most movies, the protagonist will go through some sort of journey, right? Like some sort of emotional journey. They'll evolve and learn something about themselves by the end of it. In this case, though, Bob Dylan is quite literally a complete unknown. Like, you get to see him sing, you get to see how he treats those around him, but you don't fully understand why, and the movie doesn't tell you why or give really any hints of why. And I think this choice, no matter how accurate to the person it may be, it just limits how invested I could get in the story. And I don't know if, like, even the people involved knew the answer of why he was so secretive and why he was, really not letting people, like, get under who he was. But I just kept waiting for that moment to be like, oh, that's why he's acting that way. Or, okay, now I see what this movie's trying to say. But that never really happened. I was just really hoping the movie would have more of an angle on who Bob Dylan is and why he is that way. Like, I'm just gonna go back to Better Man, which, again, highly recommend that movie. Go see it, please. I feel like I have to say that right now while it's not doing well at the box office. But that movie's like the total polar opposite of this one because, I mean, even though you could kind of argue they do have like some similar aspects, like what I think Better Man does very differently is it really lets you get inside the head of who Robbie Williams is. Like, you totally get to just get inside this guy's mind and be like, okay, I totally get why Robbie Williams is acting this way, why he feels this way. In the case of Bob Dylan, though, you don't really get in his head. You don't really get to see, like, okay, I get what you're going for here. I get why you're acting this way. So, this is a film I wanted to love and was on the way to loving, but it was ironically held back by the lead character and who he is as a person. I'm really not sure if there was just more information that the team had that just, they just didn't want to use, and I don't know, maybe that's the case, maybe it's not. But that's just kind of where I stand on this movie. In some ways, I wonder if the movie would have been more interesting if we saw the same story, but told maybe from the perspective of the supporting characters, because I think in that angle, you have all these people who are affected by Bob Dylan as a person. Like, they all kind of were in relationships with him, whether it be through friends or lovers or whatever. And maybe if you saw, like, the way he was treating them through their perspective, it might add a little more to the movie. Maybe it would, like, make you see them as the protagonist. I don't really know. Either way, I did enjoy this movie. Like, I don't want, as I said, it might sound a little more harsh than I really mean it, but just ironically, the biggest problem with the Bob Dylan movie is Bob Dylan himself. But I do really like the way Timothée Chalamet portrayed him. I like a lot of what this movie does and how it's paced, and also just how how it feels very different from a lot of other musical biopics. It just really doesn't feel like it's following a typical formula of like what they have to do and who they have to meet. Like, it's definitely different, and that represents who Bob Dylan is too, and in that way it honors him. I just think it kind of does a disservice in others, at least to the audience watching it. I wouldn't go out of my way to say this is a must-see or something I'd be rushing to see again. I'm not sure, honestly, how much this will even be up for awards, but if you do like Bob Dylan or Timothée Chalamet, give this a watch. Just don't expect to learn very much about who Bob Dylan was as a person, and I think you'll be fine. So, I'm going to rate this movie a B. It's pretty good. I was hoping for a little more out of it, but I enjoyed it. Alright, and up next is a little movie called Emilia Pérez. This movie was actually on my radar for quite some time. If you haven't heard of the name, I don't blame you. It feels like it's been like a weird thing where all of a sudden it's becoming more popular now, but I actually first heard about it at the Cannes Film Festival, along with other films like The Substance that came from there, a lot of awards buzz, and that was already around half a year ago at this point. But fast forward to this month, and it was on my radar again, because it hit Netflix not long ago and was up for a ridiculous amount of Golden Globes. Well, it actually won a bunch too, including Best Musical or Comedy, some acting, songs, and a lot of other stuff. It won a ton of awards. But something interesting happened, and that is I saw a lot of people saying it was terrible online. Like, not even just a little bit, like a whole large group of people online saying it's like terrible. And that got me curious because it had pretty good reviews, and it was clearly good enough that it was at festivals and won awards. I mean, it was on my radar for like half a year now. And then I'm hearing all these people say it's terrible, and I'm like, very interesting. Like, what is this movie? And I didn't really know much about it. I went in pretty blind. I knew the general idea of what it was about because of the Cannes Film Festival and also the Golden Globes. but I hadn't really seen many clips about it online. In any case, though, I decided to give it a watch for myself and see how I liked it, because I believe, every movie, no matter how well or poor it's received, does deserve a fair chance. I'll keep an open mind while watching it if I'm curious about it. And let me tell you, this is one of the worst musicals I have ever seen in my life. Oh yeah, that's right. It's a musical. Look, I'm not even gonna tell you what this movie is about because it's a major spoiler. But all you need to know is this is a musical involving the Mexican cartel, and the film is almost entirely in Spanish, except for say like two or three scenes maybe. It has a lot of good actors, by the way. Zoe Saldana's in this. Selena Gomez is in this. Carla Sofia Gascon, who I hadn't heard of before, but all these women are very talented. They deserve far better than this movie, and they're easily the best part of it, too. While I'm at it, I'll say the rest of my positives because I don't have many. I think the cinematography is good. There's a lot of color, and you can tell there is a visual style going on, thanks to the director, too. But just in general, the way it looks, it does feel professional. Like, it doesn't look like, I watched the movie The Firing Squad a few weeks ago. That movie looks like it was shot by not even, like, college amateurs. Like, it looked worse than that. This movie, though, looks very professional visually, and also on the sound level, the sound mixing is very well done, and the score, on a similar note, is very effective, too. That's really it as far as the positives go, though. Like, I can't really say there's much else to really, like, go out of my way to say is good about this movie. Because going back to the movie being a musical, the songs are terrible. A lot of them aren't even really songs, in my opinion, because the characters are just speaking as if they're singing. Like, that's a lot of the songs. It's just, like, speaking in a sort of humming way. There's a lot of whispering and some rap thrown in there. But a lot of the lyrics are very bad and just don't feel like music to me. There's one song about body parts that made me laugh out loud because it's so out of left field and doesn't work at all. It is terrible. The lyrics are awful. The songs also constantly interrupt the story and interrupt what could have been very serious scenes and maybe even emotional scenes in some cases. They all fall flat and feel abrupt. I'm dead serious when I say that as a musical. This makes Joker 2 look like Wicked compared to this. Like, Joker 2, I did not like Joker 2. I thought that as a musical, it failed because it just kept interjecting these musical numbers at the worst times and it just kept interrupting the story. This movie does that too, but even worse. Like, the songs are worse, and also, I think it's like doing an even worse job of interrupting during the story. Like, it's worse interruptions, worse songs, just everything is worse about it. So much so that, again, I literally, like, I'm looking at Joker 2 now, and as a musical, Joker 2 looks good compared to this. Moving on, the story could have been interesting, but it's so poorly told and has characters who are very hard to root for, by the way. You barely understand their goals or intentions or why they're even there a lot of the time. So there's very little to be invested in. I mean, you get like a basic idea of like who these people are and maybe what they might want. But after a while, like when the story keeps going, especially Zoe Saldana's character, like you understand what she wants in the beginning of the movie and you can see like, okay, I see why you're doing this. Later on though, I'm like, why are you still here? Like, this is, I don't really understand. Like, is this personal now? Is it business? Like, I'm a little confused. So that just kind of happened with a lot of the characters, and it got very confusing as to, like, what these people's purpose is now, and that's just not a good example of writing, so I didn't like that. The subject matter doesn't feel well handled either, in my opinion. I can't speak too deeply into this for spoiler reasons, and also because I don't think it's necessarily my place. But there are other movies exploring similar themes that I'd argue are much more respectful and portray the points in a more, let's say, positive manner for who it's trying to represent. I think the director here has to take a lot of the blame for that because this is a director who is doing a movie on a subject that I don't really know if he really like fully understands. And also on another level, this director is French and he's doing a whole movie on like Mexico and the Mexican cartel and all that. And I feel like that also Again, I'm not really like one to say if he did a good job or not. It just, to me, it didn't feel respectful. And I can just say that is my opinion only. But if I'd be curious to know how other people did feel about it. I just didn't think it was well done. And I just really don't feel like the director was in his place for what he did in a lot of this movie. I feel like, being a different culture and doing a subject that's as sensitive as it is in this movie, I just don't know if he was the one to handle it. And on that note, the story itself is very frustrating. The story's paced so slow and doesn't have a satisfying journey for the characters. I think the ideas themselves could have maybe worked, but it's a thing where all the wrong decisions were made and it culminated in this very bad finale that just really left me like underwhelmed and just not emotionally satisfied at all. Like what happens to the characters, I was just like, really? That's what we're doing here? Like this doesn't feel well earned at all. And that's just, the whole thing is just a really bad movie. I mean, Emilia Pérez is a train wreck of a movie, albeit a very fascinating one that you can't really look away from. I don't say this often, but I really don't see how anyone could like this movie. Like, I like to always see the other side of it. Like, if I didn't like something, I can look and say, you know what, I get why you like this. I see what you saw in this movie. I didn't see it, but I can maybe see why you did, and vice versa. Maybe I'll like a movie and I'll say, you know what, I can see what you didn't like about it. I can see maybe where you had some problems with it. But in this case, with Emilia Pérez, I can't see the other side of it. I didn't like it, and I can't see why one would. If you do like it, I'd love to hear why, and I'm glad you do, but I couldn't find anything besides maybe the performances and some of the technical aspects that I'd say make this an even remotely okay movie. It is too well made in those areas to say the movie's totally unbearable, but I was so frustrated by this movie. I think it's really bad. And I sadly am with the crowd that really doesn't like this movie. I don't know why it was nominated for any Golden Globes. If it's nominated for Best Picture at the Oscars, honestly, that would be like the worst Best Picture nomination I think I've ever seen out of anything that I have seen that's been nominated before in the past, including like Don't Look Up. It's just terrible. It's a very bad movie. I'm gonna give it a D plus. I could go lower, but I just think it's too well made in those few areas that I don't want to like completely say it's terrible, but it's bad. Don't watch it. And that about does it for this episode. If you want to follow my reviews, you can find me on Letterboxd at MovieKing1224. You can also listen to this podcast on your favorite apps such as Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, and Amazon Music. If you have any comments or feedback, I would love to hear it and improve the show. And of course, if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider liking, subscribing, and hitting the notification bell to hear more like it. I appreciate you all so much for listening, and I'll talk to you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.